everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. Today's one's actually pretty major because it seems that two editor-in-chiefs of IGN engaged in deeply unethical behavior when it came to their reporting, including forcing one of their writers to basically publish hearsay, completely unsubstantiated, that could not be backed up, in his name, purely because the two of them did not want to get, seemingly, the PR backlash for actually having their names on the story. Of course, this is something that then ties into, well, Naughty Dog, Uncharted 4, which then sort of ties into the modern stories that we've also heard about that company. And of course, a bunch of other harassment claims for those two individuals plus others at IGN. So there's a lot to get into. Of course, hope you, not enjoy, I think that's the wrong word for this one. I hope you find this interesting and enlightening. Of course, that like button is super helpful by the YouTube bots. The subscribe also helps us out too. And if you want to more directly support our team, then Patreon will also get you some early access stuff and also some cool loot in your post box. So that's what we're doing today. Hope you enjoy the video, and let's get stuck in. Okay, let's get into this big journalistic ethics mess, because this one really is quite rough. So this is all happening in the midst, of course, of people being called out in the industry for abusive and predatory behavior, and in the process of that, a fairly major journalistic mistake from IGN has been revealed. Now, this is all about the story of Amy Hennig leaving Naughty Dog. Basically, IGN's editor-in-chiefs Tal Blevins and Steve Butts, quote, heard it was a hostile takeover, so they told the writer, Mitch Dwyer, to just run with that as his story. Now, Dwyer said that this was purely gossip from Blevins and Butts. What a duo name, and that he could not verify that, what they had said, and that he did not want his name attached to that article because, yeah, he's trying to be a responsible journalist. He does not want to put something to print, so to speak, that he does not believe in, that he cannot reliably source. But, well, they were his bosses, and they forced him to publish the article with his name attached. Basically, it turns out that Butts and Blevins did not want their names on that story because they wanted to avoid potential backlash from Sony, so Dwyer was basically just forced to take the fall for them. That is some real scumbag behavior. Then later on, Tal and Steve later published an article claiming that The Last Guardian was cancelled, which was, absolutely unsubstantiated. It was total bull. Now, they later then went and blamed their news team for not chasing the story, even though it wasn't a story. So, with this, they're just douchey scumbags, but it actually does get into some worse stuff, which you'll see as we move through this video. Now, Mitch Dwyer did apologize directly to Druckmann and Starley on Twitter, who are the people implicated in that article, and they both responded positively, accepting his apology. Druckmann admitted that he was angry for a long time, and being real, I think if anybody had an article like that ended up being false published about them, then yes, they would be. But he said that he held no grudge with Dwyer. So that's essentially what happened, but it's not the most case-closed thing in the universe, I've got to say. So, look, this misreporting, right, led by Butts and Blevins, sort of under the guise of Mitch Dwyer, this spread extremely fast, and this was pretty much used as the lens for viewing Naughty Dog really for the next 6 years. Now, it did, of course, then tie into, say, Jason Schreier's reporting on their, their alleged working conditions as another example. But the thing is, we really don't know what happened. We don't know why Hennig left. It seems that, yes, Blevins and Butts kind of just heard rumors and forced them to print, even though they could not actually be backed up. Now, the only real things that I have seen is there's what we covered in a previous video, which was a guy attached to was it the Uncharted film, who was outright hostile on Druckmann. And then there's also the words of Alan Tudyk, who is, Wash in Firefly, right? He's an actor, voice actor. He was going to be in Uncharted 4. And here's a quote from him. So he said, this is a bit weird because it's kind of me saying a quote that's very much off the cuff, but he said, I liked it. They fired. Then he sort of lets out a sigh and says, I left. I quit. So a little bit weird. So he said that. And then he said, so I didn't like it. I mean, I left because they decided to go a different way with it. And so when they changed leadership, I think that's the more interesting part for our story, it made my contract null and void, and I was able to take that opportunity to walk away, which was great, because I got the experience of doing it. I made some friends, not with Naughty Dog, but I made some friends with the people that left. So that's basically Alan Tudyk. Is he saying he was fired there? Because the way he says that, it almost sounds like he could have been fired, but he just preemptively quit because his contract allowed him to do so. And then he said that he didn't like the script, he didn't like where it was going, so that's why he walked away. And he sort of, I think there is drawing a direct causal link between the changing of the leadership and the things that led to him leaving. And it is interesting that he then said that, yes, he made friends, but not with Naughty Dog. So that would be, I think, saying that he made friends with the people he worked with, like actors and stuff, but maybe not the company itself, which of course would reflect not that well on the leadership of the company, which of course would tie into those rumors that Butts and Blevins sort of pushed through Dryer. But then the thing is, well, it really does seem like those things from Butts and Blevins were basically bull and could not be backed up. So overall, this is an extremely messy situation, right? And just the whole state of what's actually going on within Naughty Dog, well, it's kind of hard to know, right? Of course, many people assumed that, this drama here, and, it's the sort of thing where Alan Tudyk doesn't outright say it, right? But many people did just assume that that was the drama of the project, moving on from Amy Hennig to Neil Druckmann. So that's basically what's going on there. And of course, it is worth me also saying that, that quote, right, from Alan Tudyk, well, that is from IGN. That was originally published in 2015 with an update in 2017. So that very much was at this era where Butts and Blevins were kind of running around the place. And it would make sense. They would greenlight this article because it would back up the rumors that they said they heard. But at the same time, it is just in that big quagmire of really it's impossible to know, so the best we can do is kind of just talk about the data points that we know and then sort of say, well, what do you think, right? So that people are aware, basically. But the overall thing here is that a lot of the recent Last of Us 2 Part 2 discourse has been shaped by, in a way, some of that IGN misreporting. And that does make you think, was that true? And on that one, I say it's hard to say. I do imagine that something went down in that leadership change, and that probably did lead to a major creative change with where that game was going, and that probably is what led to Alan Tudyk going. But that said, I think it's probably not in as dramatic a fashion as what Butts and Blevins tried to push via Mitch Dwyer's work. And I think it's the sort of thing where misinformation like this can be incredibly damaging, and it has been damaging to the reputation of Naughty Dog management, that is for sure. Now, there is good reason to believe some of their bad reputation, right? Some of Jason Schreier's reporting is pretty damn scathing, and I think what backs that up is that you then saw more people coming out of the woodwork, like that animator guy, talking about the struggles of working there, which kind of does lend credence to there being, issues at that company. But I think here is less that what Butts and Blevins pushed was a source's rumor. It's more that it was entirely unverifiable by Mitch, and fundamentally here, forcing a journalist to put their name onto work that they cannot stand by, that is completely terrible. That's absolutely untenable. That is not the sort of thing that we want to have happening. And the thing is that these outlets, they're supposed to be journalists. They're supposed to be the people who are airing the stories that we need to hear. And that's the kind of problem with them doing things that erodes trust in the media. And that really does lead us into this very, very large quagmire of it being really hard to trust anything, which really does suck, because it's just harder to get oriented in the world and to actually make sense of what is going on. And this could also, of course, cast a pretty large shadow over IGN's past reporting. I mean, come on, what other stories were exaggerated? What else did Butts and Blevins end up doing, right? Maybe, nothing as juicy as this story really comes to mind for me, but who knows? We could hear more stuff in the future. And it's weird. IGN's history has generally been bleak, as I think it has been with a lot of major outlets. And, I do think they were largely built on games media's early days of quid pro quo, probably quite a bit of access journalism. Now, I know there's a lot of people who have spoken out against that, but there's somebody I actually know in my personal life, and I can't really say anything that's too identifiable, but suffice to say, it's somebody who worked on the PR side within EA on, I think it was Command and Conquer. It was one of the Command and Conquer games. And let's just say, there's a story. I couldn't actually say the story because I think it would then be personally identifiable. But that's a situation where it's like, I know of this story of a wild buttering up of journos for the sake of getting, hitting a review, like a Metascore target. That stuff, I know of stories of that happening, right? And that's the kind of thing you just sort of find out when, you just kind of get the industry chit-chat, I suppose. Now, this is all stuff from long in the past. past. Good chance a bunch of that's not happening as much now, but certainly in the early days of the games media, which is really when a lot of the foundations of the likes of IGN were built, yeah, it does actually seem like that stuff did happen. And really, it's that thing where, yeah, a lot of people probably know there's bad stuff going on, but come on, like, a lot of people are like, if they speak up, what's going to happen? It's going to cost them their career. And the story usually goes that employees, they're told that they should be grateful for their position, that it's hard to get into games media, kind of implying they could be easily replaced because so many people want to be working in games media, and that results, the overwork, the fear of going against the grain, and a lot of power ending up in the people like Butts and Blevins. And I think you've got that thing, right, where when the games media is small in its inception, right, there's, you can kind of still do well there, right, even though you're kind of low quality. You can have a sort of big fish in a small pond situation. And I think that means that as some of these companies have scaled, it's became very apparent that some of their top people, in any other industry just would not do, right? They were only okay because games sort of was small when it started off. So you just got these people who rode the wave. Bit tricky, and then you get that sort of tied in with the access, the sort of access journalism side of things. I mean, even going through for the research of this video, we found an old article from, I think it was an interview that had Luke Smith in it. He's, of course, now the director of Destiny 2, but yeah, he was outspoken about that back in 2006 when he worked at 1UP, and this was it was an interview with The Escapist, where he called it regurgitation of information sent as a part of a PR plan rather than actual journalistic reporting. And in the same interview, another journalist said, "We can pretend we are not in the pocket of the big companies, but we cover an industry rather than an art form." So it seems like, that some of that stuff's less common now, but in the past there was less scrutiny. Games PR would throw lavish events to accommodate journalists. There wouldn't be disclosure. It's the sort of stuff that Red Letter Media's Nerd Crew parodies pretty well. And that story that I brought to you on the Command & Conquer franchise is sort of one example of that, right? And basically the point here, right, is that games media has had a pretty rotten background, and it's something that it does actually need to recover from. Now, the final thing to talk about in this video is some of the harassment stuff, and this is not particularly cool, let's just say. It's actually quite bad. So, in terms of victims, right, there's Mitch Dwyer, who we've already covered. So, in addition to the Naughty Dog story, he claims to have been exploited and manipulated professionally while he was at the company. And then Stephen Tal, they were supposedly staying at like $3,000 Airbnbs, but made other staff share rooms in super cheap hotels, which, that's not literally a harassment thing, but it's absolutely what I'd say is scumbag behavior. Then there's also, I think, Callie Page, where basically she experienced significant emotional and professional abuse that was undermining her work, including Tal not letting her get lunch, being shouted at constantly, and a bunch of things like that. And when Tal Blevins was finally given the boot, Steve Butts became her boss, and she actually said it got worse. So there was just standard bullying and intimidation tactics going on. And then there was also sexual harassment problems from somebody called Vincent Ingentio. There's also then Eric Sapp, who did not give details, but claims to have been sexually harassed and emotionally abused by Tal and Steve while working there. There's Joshua Yell, who said they were sexually harassed by Tal. There's Tina Sanchez, who said that she was actually not allowed to be on camera because she was basically told she wasn't hot enough. And that actually got to the stage where she was asked to ghostwrite for female co-workers who were deemed attractive enough for video. There's Chloe Reed, who basically, right, she was the Soulsborne expert at IGN, but she was told she couldn't VO her own videos because Dark Souls needed a masculine voice to be on videos, which really is ridiculous. And actually, I think that stuff going on is something we all would have seen when we actually look at some of that IGN content, right? Where you've got this person and they kind of look a certain way, and it turns out they're probably perfectly competent people. It's just you've got situations like this where people are being, made to ghostwrite for other people, so they're not presenting their own work, so they don't seem passionate about it. You know what I mean, right? Like all that rough stuff. I mean, if you think back to some of that IGN content you probably watched, that does make a decent bit of sense. It does kind of fit. Now, as for the culprits here, there's Tal Blevins, of course, we've mentioned in this video. So he's the IGN co-founder and ex-editor-in-chief, and it looks like he was fired in 2016. It's kind of hard to find out why, but I think you can sort of read in between the lines here. There's Steve Butts, who is of course, another IGN editor-in-chief, fired in 2018 over alleged misconduct. It was harassment against a female employee, and that was basically the final nail in IGN's coffin for him, so he was gone. There's then Casey Lynch, who was an IGN editor-in-chief as well, who's now working with Crystal Dynamics as an editorial director, and actually hosted last night's Avengers War Table presentation, so that's obviously pretty rough. There's Vincent Ingendio, who is an editor at IGN, who was booted for sexual harassment against 2 female employees, and that's all that we know right now, but there probably is more stuff to come from other outlets. Around the time that Steve got booted out, things apparently changed for the better at IGN, and many people have said that IGN is actually now a pretty great place to work after the leadership changes, and more staff were actually taking a stand together against some of the bad behavior that was going on at the company. And I think really it's just that by bringing all of this stuff to light, we're, I think, able to steer media in a significantly better direction. And the thing is, like, those things, those things do happen, right? And it sucks that they happen, but we gotta live in reality. They do happen. A lot of people, once they get the power, they just think they can get away with the most heinous stuff. And I think as the last few days have repeatedly shown us, and I mean, even, World of Warcraft is where I come from, so there's all the stuff with Method Josh, right? An actual, it seems like basically was grooming kids, and ended up being shielded effectively by his organization for a year. So there's just a lot of terrible stuff. It's worth paying attention to, is seeing what's going on out there, because well, it seems like there's a big reckoning coming on, I suppose. I mean, God, after all of it, I think about the times I've been invited to, like, a TwitchCon or something, and you just sort of think, man, the stuff going on there when you just have a bunch of probably, right, like, high in their own fame, ego-driven streamers, I'll make no like apologies. There's a lot of the streaming stuff I just find pretty annoying and ego-driven. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's just like distasteful to me. And I've certainly seen little glimpses of that as I've been going around the place. But yeah, it seems like, man, the degree of problem there is like larger than I think one would think. So, an interesting situation. That is this story with IGN, and also how it pertains to The Last of Us Part 2 and all of that Naughty Dog information. So I hope you found this video, at the very least, useful, because at the end of the day, we've got to live in reality, and the more info we have, the better we can actually work out what the hell reality is. It can be bloody hard to do that sometimes. So, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time.